Chapter 14. Vittoria stared at her lunch with unusual intensity the next morning when Mateo sat in the chair next to her with a barely suppressed groan. "Something on your mind?" he asked dryly. She wore a simple ivory gown without ruffles, as usual. It fitted to her elbows, scooped around her collarbones, and drew attention to her lovely neck. He wanted to run his thumb across the seam of her lips. Instead, he waited. Vittoria swallowed, but she wouldn't meet his gaze. She rubbed her left arm with her right hand, brows knitted together. Then, seeming to feel the weight of his stare, she turned to look right at him. All hope of a relaxing meal vanished when 3 cat-like scratches across her cheek caught his gaze. "What happened?" he whispered, his voice stark. With a soft inhale, she reached up and touched them with her fingertips. She looked back at the table. "It was nothing." Gently, he took her chin in his hand and turned her face to see the marks better. Though they were still swollen and crimson, they looked too shallow to be from an animal. They stretched from the top of her cheekbone nearly to her mouth. A dark feeling settled in his belly. "Pear." Her gaze met his for a brief moment, then she pulled away from his touch. Lazy curls fell to the bottom of her shoulder blades, and the gentle slope of her nose was silhouetted against the sunshine outside. Vague memories flickered through his mind from last night. Her face hovering over his, locks of hair tickling his cheek, a warm murmur, a soft touch. She'd cared for him all night. It was the first time in over a decade that he didn't feel quite so alone. With the sense of belonging came a surge of protective rage that he carefully schooled into concern. "What happened?" "My fault," Benat said as he entered the room. He stood near the doorway, arms folded over his chest. His scowl would have set water on fire. "There was a mob in Netchi. The guardians came, grabbed her, and transported her away before we could get out." Mateo frowned. "It was my fault." Vittoria held her chin a little higher. "Benat kept me safe. Without him, I might have been killed by the mob." With a jerky nod, Mateo motioned for Benat to sit. "Tell me everything." Vittoria obliged with a careful calm. "A crowd mobbed me in Netchi, and while Benat was trying to get me out, a guardian grabbed my arm. They took me to Hodei." She looked at her hand in her lap and sucked in a sharp breath. "He forced me into a chair with magic and then spoke with me." Mateo's shoulders tightened. He put a fist over his mouth and waited. She trained a wary gaze on him, then continued. "At first, he just said he was impressed because we took him by surprise. He spoke about you and Romeo." Her brow furrowed. "He mentioned something about my cape and La Principessa." Benat's gaze flickered to him, but he ignored it. Vittoria shook her head as if to clear her thoughts. "He said he brought me there because he wanted to meet me, but I think he just wanted to scare me. He spoke about my family. He knew what had happened to my pair, that Mare had worked for Moretti, and that her disappearance meant she could be piked if she were ever found. He knew Enrico's name." She bit her bottom lip, the skin turning white beneath her teeth. Mateo's jaw tightened at the fear in her gaze. "He said that I wasn't safe, that he was allowing me to live." "Why?" The word came out of Mateo with a raspy breath. The force it required to restrain his rage cost him precious energy, but he held it together. She hesitated, her mouth half open. Then she lifted her shoulders in a delicate shrug. "I don't know. He spoke about your mare." This time, she met his gaze. "He said she had betrayed him or something." Mateo sucked in a sharp breath through his nose. "How did you get away?" She blinked. "He let me go, eventually. I ran to the window. When I stumbled onto the beach, in the garden, Joska appeared. He brought me to Benat." Mateo's nails ached from digging into his palm. He made a mental note to personally thank Joska later. He must have gone right to the garden near Hodei's office. A smart man. With a shudder, she said, It wasn't as bad as it could have been, but I am afraid for my family. Mateo, if something happens to them—" "It won't, lady," Benat said. "I've already sent a man to stay there all day." The firmness of Benat's tone seemed to steady her. Her shoulders relaxed a little. "Thank you, Benat." Mateo leaned forward, put a hand on hers, and said, "I'm sorry, Vittoria. Hodei was trying to get into your head. It's what he does. He plays mind games with witches. He wanted to make you afraid of him so you'd give up, run away. He'd do anything to keep me from the throne. You are safe with me, I guarantee it. All of us would give our lives for you." A troubled expression crossed her face but quickly disappeared. He wondered what it meant. Then he reached up, caressing the skin beneath the slash marks. Guilt warred with rage. He spent so long protecting her, only to fail her at this precious stage. "I'm sorry he was able to hurt you. I blame myself." She put her hand over his. "No, Mateo, I'm afraid what Hodei did was vengeful," he said before she could absolve him. "He was trying to mar your face. Landowner women regard their complexion as their greatest asset. Perfection is paramount. They transport all the way to the Western network to get to a certain clay that helps the skin. That's so far that witches have died in the transport. Or they spend currency on potions that make their skin appear perfect. It was a catty attempt to foil your future success." She managed a small smile. "Fortunately, I don't care all that much about landowner beauty ideals." Mateo smiled softly. Fate must have given her to him indeed, for he couldn't imagine how lucky he'd been to find her. "I'm sorry. We will never fail in protecting you again, Vittoria." Her expression tightened, and she nodded. Benat stewed with an ugly glower. Mateo's mind, still foggy with residual pain, worked slowly through her explanation. Something didn't quite add up, but he wasn't in the right frame of mind to figure it out. At least his anger had taken his mind off the pain. He thought of Pear with another twist of fury that could power him through anything. "The test of magic is in 2 weeks," Mateo said, and Vittoria seemed relieved at the change in topic. "Balta sent out a letter this morning." "Will you be healed?" Benat asked. Mateo shrugged. "Doesn't matter. It still starts in 2 weeks." "What is the next test?" Vittoria asked, poking at a bit of soft goat cheese with a fork. She seemed less wary now that she'd told her secret, but she still didn't quite meet his gaze. "Not sure of the details, but it won't be as physical and will involve magic. Complicated ancient magic, I suspect, if Balta's involved. Probably with some sort of military slant. The only thing I know is that it will somehow involve magical skills that I'll need as High Priest." Vittoria nodded. Mateo turned back to Benat. "While we wait, we need to try again to contact the rebels. Try the ones in the Nechi Coven this time. Mayfair's ignored us too long. Then send 2 men to try to speak to the rebels in the orchards again. I don't want to proceed into the battle against Romeo without a plan in place for the rebels, or else anarchy will break out once I take the throne. It's what the rebels want." "They want anarchy?" Vittoria asked, looking startled. "Yes, so that they can put their own high priest on the throne. They are always looking for an opportunity to do so. As soon as I take power, the rebels will try to kill me and Romeo to destroy the Castaneda line in a public way." "But why not do that now?" "It wouldn't be as dramatic," Benat said with a scowl. "The rebels want to show their power and take the throne violently from the Castanedas. Not only that, but they want revenge for all that workers have been put through all these years, and they may not be able to strike unless both Romeo and Mateo are distracted. They are both powerful magic users with witches who protect them. If they incite chaos and a civil war..." Mateo allowed the silence to fill in the rest. No doubt Vittoria could easily piece it together in her mind. "But who would they put in place?" "That's the biggest question. We've tried for years to figure it out, but no one knows the leader of the rebels, or if there is a centralized leader. Rumors say there are several. Others say there is one and he is highly protected. Either the rebel groups aren't working together, or they sow chaos among their own to protect whomever is behind it all." "Once Romeo or I win," Mateo continued, "we must be ready for the rebels' response. For 10 years, I carefully and slowly set up a relationship with the rebels. They talked to me. Never too much, never too close, but I had witches there who would listen to me. The last year?" He shook his head. "They've shut us out." Stunned, she just stared at him. The surprise in her face upset him. He wished he could take it from her, make this somehow easier. She'd been snatched from an unsafe but unchanging world and shoved into one that was as steady as an earthquake. Of course, there was nothing he could do about their current circumstances. Not immediately, anyway. He needed time. Yet time was the one thing they didn't have. He shouldn't care about her this much so soon. No son of Hodei should carry this much emotion in his heart. Compassion, empathy, such characteristics were lost on Per. Even on Mare, to some extent. She'd viewed the world through the lens of, what can I lose next and how will I stop it? Emotion was expendable. Mare had been a true child of the streets, which left him in that strange in-between yet again. Vittoria cleared her throat, which brought him out of his spiraling thoughts. His arm ached beneath the bandage. He wanted to wrap himself in a dark world and fall asleep for days, but there was business to attend to. Would you mind if I went into Nechi again today? Benat's eyes widened, but before either of them could protest, she held up a hand. I know it may not be safe after the mob, but I want to go somewhere specific. Benat may scout it out ahead of me, meet my sister-in-law to confirm it's all right for me to go, and then transport me there, if that's safer. Sannara, Mateo ventured a guess. Vittoria nodded. When I saw my family last night, they told me they haven't seen Sannara since they moved out there. I promised them I'd find her after the test of courage. Nico misses his mare. And you, he added quietly. She hesitated. I'm concerned. Sannara has always been in and out. She rarely stays, and Nico is used to that. I am more of his mare than she is, but still, we're worried about her. Of course. Mateo gestured to Benat. Benat and his men will keep you safe. Let's do your usual food buckets out at the eastern farms today. They won't have such a response there, and they haven't seen you yet. It's a longer transportation, but worth the work. Vittoria smiled with some relief. She must have been afraid he'd tried to keep her back. Then she excused herself. Once she was out of earshot, Benat leaned forward. Did something happen with Hodei, you think? She's different now. Quieter. His countenance darkened. Of course, he slashed her with his nails and revealed his dark soul. Or maybe she's just frightened. Mateo frowned. There was definitely something different today, and he didn't think Vittoria was frightened. She seemed distracted, concerned. Of course, that could be about Sannara, but the instincts that had kept him alive thus far denied that. Yes, something else is happening. Likely, Hodei is trying to manipulate her. Keep your eyes open and keep me informed. I must speak with Balta in the meantime.